The late afternoon in the square was like any other. Children ran among the colorful toys, happy voices mingled with birdsong, and the smell of freshly cut grass created the illusion that nothing could ever happen there. Everything seemed in perfect harmony, as if the place were shielded from any tragedy. But sometimes the greatest warnings come disguised as banal gestures. No one paid attention when a seemingly ordinary woman approached the wooden bench with silent steps, glanced discreetly around, and left a brown bag resting between the slats. Without a word, she turned and left as calmly as she had arrived. Almost no one noticed. Almost. But a boy, sitting in the shade of a tree, observed everything with the sensitivity of someone who has learned to read the world in its small movements. He didn't know the woman, had never seen her around. Something in her posture, the restrained haste of her steps, the gaze that avoided direct contact, awakened something within him. A silent unease that couldn't be ignored. When she disappeared into the streets, the boy approached. The bag was there, intact, ordinary. But upon touching it, he realized the contents weren't what one would expect from a simple, forgotten delivery. Inside was something that didn't belong there, contents that carried weight, not just physical but also moral. A secret that, if revealed, would disrupt the tranquility of the entire city. Minutes later, patrol cars would surround the park. Police officers would ask questions, and previously distracted eyes would be overcome by fear. But the question no one could answer was, why was that bag left there? And what would have happened if no one had noticed? If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss the next stories that deserve to be told. Darius Mitchell wasn't just another child playing in that park. While other boys chased balls or competed to see who could climb the highest slides, he remained silent, observing every detail of his surroundings. His gaze held a mixture of curiosity and melancholy, as if he held too many questions for such a young age. At 11, Darius had already learned that the world wasn't fair and that often the little ones weren't heard by the grown-ups. His mother, Angela Mitchell, worked double shifts as a nurse at a local hospital. She was a woman of admirable strength, but she barely had time to rest. Darius's days were mostly solitary. After school, he spent hours at the public library leafing through investigative books, detective stories, and old news reports. He was fascinated by the idea that the truth, no matter how hidden, always found a way to surface. Perhaps it was this silent passion that made him so attentive to every gesture, every suspicious look, every detail that adults overlooked. Despite his intelligence, school wasn't easy for him. Some classmates mocked his quiet and reserved demeanor, calling him a fake detective or making up cruel jokes. Darius rarely fought back. He shielded himself in silence and transformed his pain into more observation. Angela, whenever she could, reminded him that courage wasn't about shouting the loudest, but about standing firm when no one believed you. These words echoed in his mind during his most difficult moments. He dreamed of a different future. He liked to imagine himself uncovering secrets that would change history, helping those who had been wronged, and proving that even a boy could be a hero. But deep down, he didn't expect that life would so soon offer him a real opportunity to experience what he'd only known in books. That particular afternoon, sitting in the square, Darius carried an old notebook where he jotted down notes about things that caught his attention. It wasn't common for a child to have this habit, but for him, it was almost like breathing. He wrote about conversations he overheard, about the strange behavior of neighbors, about small details that seemed trivial. But that, in his mind, could be pieces of a larger puzzle. He had no close friends, and perhaps it was precisely this loneliness that drew him even closer to the hidden world of details. Each page of that notebook represented a fragment of his attentive gaze and his need to understand the truth hidden behind appearances. Darius didn't know it, but he was about to experience the scene that would change everything he knew. His eyes, trained by curiosity and loneliness, wouldn't miss the detail. Most would miss. While families laughed distractedly and children played leisurely, he saw a woman who didn't belong in that ordinary scene. And when she stopped at a bench with nervous steps, clutching a brown bag as if it were an unbearable weight, Darius knew something extraordinary was about to happen. At first, she seemed like just another woman crossing the square. She wore a long coat, even though the afternoon was milder, and sunglasses that hid part of her face. The difference, however, was in her movements. She looked back every 2 or 3 steps as if afraid she was being followed. Her fingers gripped the handle of her brown bag tightly, betraying the tension consuming her. Darius followed her every gesture with his gaze, while her breathing slowed, as if instinctively preparing for something she didn't yet understand. The people around him were oblivious, distracted by trivial conversations, but the boy sensed something deeply wrong with the scene. The woman's heart seemed to pound in her expression, filled with haste and fear, and even without knowing her, Darius knew this was an unusual moment. She then stopped in front of a wooden bench, took a deep breath as if carrying a weight greater than her body can bear, and with trembling hands placed the bag on the seat. She stood still for a few seconds, looking around as if to confirm no one was paying attention. But the boy was there, motionless, hidden behind the tree, witnessing every detail with the same concentration of an investigator faced with a crucial clue. It was at that moment that something even more disturbing caught his attention. In the background, near the street that ran through the square, 2 police officers were observing the scene. They were standing side by side, talking in low voices, but their gaze never left the woman. The strange thing was that, even in the face of that suspicious gesture, they didn't approach. They made no move to investigate the situation, as would be expected of law enforcement officers. They remained motionless, almost as if waiting for something. The woman, without looking back, turned quickly and began walking at an increasingly hurried pace until she disappeared among the trees leading to the exit of the square. The bag remained alone, resting on the bench, radiating a sense of mystery that seemed to envelop the entire place. Darius felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew this was no ordinary gesture, and that there was a secret inside the bag that no one else seemed willing to notice. The silence of the officers in the distance made it all the more unsettling. It was as if they were pretending not to see, or worse, waiting for it to follow a predetermined script. The boy clutched the worn notebook to his chest as if seeking strength. His instincts screamed that he shouldn't ignore it, but at the same time, something inside him warned him that he was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. And, as the wind made the pages of his notebook rustle on their own, Darius realized he had to choose between turning his face away like everyone else or facing the mystery that called to him. Little did he know that this moment of indecision would be just the first of many tests of courage to come. The bench seemed to radiate a strange presence. The bag lay there as if it were an ordinary object, but to Darius, every detail screamed danger and mystery. He stood still for a few seconds, observing. From a distance, while his thoughts raced silently, fear washed over him like a heavy wave, reminding him of all the stories he'd read where curiosity turned into a trap. What if there was something dangerous inside? What if that woman had left an object that could harm innocent people? Or worse, what if the police officers in the background were waiting for someone to approach so they could frame them? His body wanted to run, but his mind wouldn't allow it. He knew that if he turned away, he'd spend his whole life wondering what was in that bag. He remembered his mother Angela's words, repeated so often on difficult nights. Courage is not the absence of fear, son. Courage is moving forward in spite of it. These phrases appeared in his memory like a lighthouse in the midst of a storm. He took a deep breath, his heart racing as if it were about to explode inside his chest. Each step he took toward the bank seemed to echo louder than the last. His eyes never left the bag, and at the same time, he realized the police officers were still there, motionless, their cold, silent gazes on him. This only increased the weight of his decision. Darius hesitated for a moment, looking around as if searching for an adult willing to intervene, but no one seemed to notice. The children continued running, the families continued talking, and life in the square continued as normal. Only he could see how urgently that forgotten object carried. He was alone. Alone to decide whether to run and forget or face and discover. His feet finally carried him to the bench, and his trembling hands slowly reached for the handle of his bag. The cool touch of the synthetic leather sent another shiver through him. This was no longer just a matter of curiosity, but a definitive choice that could change his fate. Darius swallowed, closed his eyes briefly, and let courage override his fear. Then, with a swift movement, he pulled the bag toward him, ready to face the unknown within. What he would see inside would not only confirm his suspicions, but would plunge him into a world of secrets and dangers far greater than his imagination could have foreseen. The bag felt heavier than it should have. Darius pulled it carefully, the rough material feeling against his small hands. For a moment he hesitated again, as if something inside him was screaming at him to drop it and run. But it was too late. Curiosity had turned to need, and his heart, though gripped by fear, urged him forward. He crouched beside the bench, slowly unzipped the bag, and smelled a faint scent of old paper mixed with dust, as if the contents had been hidden for a long time. Inside was a thick, crumpled envelope, marked by nervous fingers that had handled it earlier. The red, confidential letters immediately caught his eye. Pulling it out, he realized it was filled with bound documents, folders, and a few photographs. The images, in black and white, and others in faded colors, showed people in meetings, discreet handshakes, and nighttime office scenes that appeared to have been surreptitiously photographed. Some photos had pen notes, arrows, and dates. It was as if they were part of a secret investigation, conducted by someone who had taken serious risks to gather this evidence. At the bottom of the bag, almost hidden, was a silver flash drive, crushed at one end. Darius held it carefully, and for a moment he was paralyzed, wondering what it could contain. Videos, recordings, perhaps secrets, even greater than the papers could reveal. As he quickly leafed through the documents, a sense of gravity grew within him. Words like bribe, contract, influence peddling, and judicial corruption appeared in extensive reports. There were names of well-known businessmen in the city, men in suits who appeared on magazine covers smiling for cameras, and even the surnames of politicians who held important positions. With each page, the weight of the discovery seemed to multiply. Her stomach churned. It wasn't just confirmation that something was wrong with that bag, but the revelation that the city was poisoned from the ground up. It was impossible to believe such serious evidence was there, abandoned on a park bench. Why would that woman have left all of it in that exact spot? And why did she look so desperate as she walked away? Darius felt his throat dry. He was facing something much bigger than himself. The stories he'd read in research books had never felt so real as they did in that moment. The difference was that now there were no fictional characters, but powerful and influential people who controlled the city's destiny. He put the papers back with trembling hands, trying to remain calm, but his entire body was already vibrating with alert. He knew any misstep could cost him dearly. He stood up slowly, looked around, and realized the square looked the same as always. But in his mind, everything had changed. He was no longer just a boy sitting with a notebook in his hands. but someone carrying in his arms a truth that could shake the very foundations of the city. However, as he walked a few steps away, he felt the weight of a disturbing thought. If this evidence was so important, weren't they being watched? What if, at that very moment, someone already knew he had opened the bag? A shiver ran down his spine as he remembered the two police officers in the distance, motionless, their eyes suspicious. They were still there, and now they seemed too attentive. It was in that instant that Darius understood. It wasn't just a matter of discovering, but of surviving what he had just encountered. Darius's hands were still shaking as he zipped up the bag. His heart was pounding wildly, as if each beat echoed through the silent square. He couldn't take his eyes off the documents, the photos, and the flash drive. It was all too real. These weren't figments of his imaginative mind, nor mystery stories he'd secretly read in the library. He was faced with concrete, living, tangible proof of something involving the people who governed the city and who determined the lives of thousands. He wondered who had gathered this information. The woman who had left the bag didn't just seem like someone on the run. There was something in her gesture, in the way she looked around, that betrayed a conscious choice. It was as if she had planned to leave everything there for someone to find. But by whom? Why would he, an 11-year-old boy sitting in the square with an old notebook, have witnessed something so serious? As he tried to make sense of it, his thoughts were interrupted by the detail that disturbed him most. The police officers. They remained there, motionless, almost like living statues. Their gazes were fixed on the scene, and now Darius was certain it was no coincidence. Uniformed officers couldn't have seen a woman abandon a suspicious bag and simply ignored it. It wasn't carelessness, it was intention. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. They knew. Maybe they were even part of what was documented in the files. They were accomplices, guardians of a secret that couldn't be revealed. And now, he, a random boy, was the uncomfortable witness. A chill ran down his spine as he imagined what might happen if they discovered he'd tampered with the bag. In that instant, Darius's childhood world crumbled. He was no longer just an observant boy, but someone carrying in his hands a bomb of information that could destroy careers, topple authorities, and ignite a silent war in the city. He considered telling someone, perhaps running to a trusted adult, but quickly dismissed the idea. Who would believe a boy? Who would stand up against such powerful figures based solely on evidence found on a park bench? The fear grew, but with it also a strange flame of responsibility. It was as if he had been chosen against his will to carry this truth. The square, once filled with children's laughter, now seemed a hostile scene. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees fiercely, and every sound seemed like a warning. The police officer's fixed gaze pressed down on him, as if at any moment they would advance to take back the bag. Darius took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil within him, but the more he thought, the clearer it became that his life had changed forever in that moment. Nothing would ever be the same again. He couldn't simply close his eyes and forget. The evidence was in his hands, and ignoring it would be like participating in the complicit silence that kept the city prisoner to corruption. Still, the fear lingered. He knew he couldn't just stand there, but he also didn't know where to turn. What to do with something so large? Who could be trusted in a situation where even the police seemed corrupt? It was at that moment that he felt the first footstep approaching behind him. He didn't need to look to know. Someone had noticed he'd moved the bag. The air grew heavier and his breath hitched. For a second, the danger that until then seemed distant was now within reach of his back. Darius swallowed hard and for a moment felt his legs nearly give out. The sound of footsteps behind him was slow, deliberate, as if the approaching man was unhurriedly announcing their presence. He turned around and in the reflection of the square's lights saw the silhouette of one of the police officers standing out against the gloom. The man walked toward him with a cold gaze, his eyes never leaving. The bag the boy clutched to his chest. Survival instincts took over. Darius hugged the bag tightly as if it were his only protection and took a few steps back. His mind raced. If the police were involved, approaching them was signing his own death sentence. The other officer remained standing further back, watching, as if merely awaiting the inevitable outcome. This was no mere chance encounter, but a silent hunt. The boy tried to remain calm. He looked around and noticed that the families who had previously occupied the square were beginning to disperse, as if some strange collective intuition had alerted them that it was time to leave. The cheerful atmosphere was transforming into an empty and menacing space where every shadow seemed to hide dark intentions. "Boy," the police officer said firmly, his deep voice echoing in the night, "that bag isn't yours. Hand it over immediately." The words sounded like an order, but also like a trap. Darius knew that if he gave in, everything would be swallowed by silence. No one would ever hear of those documents again, and the city would remain hostage to the same men who appeared smiling in the photographs he now kept. His breathing became ragged, and cold sweat trickled down his forehead, but he still found the strength to take a step back. The police officer moved closer, closing the distance between them. The man's gaze was merciless, and Darius could feel the weight of corrupt authority trying to crush him. The boy, however, knew he had to act quickly. Fear was overwhelming, but the flame of courage reignited when he remembered his mother's words. Courage was not the absence of fear, but facing danger even while trembling inside. Suddenly, a gust of wind scattered some dry leaves across the ground, the noise enough to distract him for a moment. Darius seized the opportunity, turned, and ran with all the strength in his legs. He could feel his heart exploding in his chest as the police officer's shouts echoed behind him. The lights of the square blurred as his feet found their way out of the suffocating space. Each step felt heavier than the last, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He knew he couldn't stop. There was no way he could go back home, as that would be the first place they'd look for him. He needed to find a safe place where he could think, analyze what he had in his hands, and decide his next step. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant, but still, Darius didn't dare slow down. The streets were eerily quiet for this hour, as if the entire city had become complicit in the secret he carried. As he turned the corner, he spotted the imposing public library building, its glass doors reflecting the streetlights. It was the only place he'd ever felt safe, his only refuge amidst the chaos. He ran toward the entrance, trying to stifle his labored breath. His feet nearly tripped on the steps, but he held firm until he reached the door. He pushed it open hard and entered the silent building, where the air smelled of old books and varnished wood. There, surrounded by the knowledge he so loved, he believed he would have a few minutes of respite. However, what he was about to discover within those walls would not only increase the weight of the truth he carried, but also set him on a path of no return. The silence of the library felt like a relief after the frantic rush through the streets. The dim lights illuminated endless rows of bookshelves, and the familiar smell of aged paper enveloped the room with an almost ironic calm. Darius leaned against the wooden counter to catch his breath, his heart still pounding in his chest like a runaway drum. For a moment he closed his eyes, trying to believe he was safe, but the fear was still there, throbbing, reminding him that nothing was truly resolved. Clutching the bag tightly, he walked to a table in the far corner, out of sight of the front door. He sat down slowly, observing the shadows of the surrounding bookshelves, and unzipped the bag again. He needed to be sure that what he'd seen wasn't the result of an exaggerated impulse, but rather an unquestionable truth. He spread the documents out on the table, one by one, with trembling hands. The pages revealed falsified contracts, records of deposits in foreign accounts, lists of names accompanied by suspicious numbers. Some pages bore the seals of government agencies, proof that the information was not fabricated. They were official documents, extracted from within the system itself. The photographs, when placed side by side, showed nocturnal encounters in luxurious restaurants, handshakes between figures who, in front of the cameras, declared themselves political rivals, but who appeared united as accomplices in the same dirty game. Darius recognized some faces: mayors, judges, businessmen from large local companies, all men his mother had cited as examples of power and influence, but who were now exposed as pawns on a corrupt board. Among the folders, he found an even more disturbing list. Police officers' names, along with their ranks and addresses, were linked to bribe amounts. And among them, unsurprisingly, were the surnames of the two officers who had been chasing him in the square minutes earlier. The chill that ran down his spine confirmed his suspicions. They weren't just observers, they were secret keepers, ready to eliminate any threat. Darius leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath as he absorbed the weight of his discovery. He felt crushed, as if each page were a stone resting on his chest. It wasn't just the corruption of a few men, but an entire system corroded, sustained by pacts of silence and fear. And now, he, a boy, held in his hands the key to breaking that silence. His eyes fell on the flash drive. The small metal object reflected the library's light, simple and discreet, yet charged with mystery. He wondered what it might contain. Perhaps voice recordings, perhaps compromising videos, perhaps the definitive evidence that would complete the puzzle. But without a computer to verify it, he could only imagine. For a few minutes he stood there, reflecting. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get away from it, and pretend he'd never seen anything. But something deeper, a voice that seemed to originate from within his very soul, told him this was the moment he could prove his worth. It didn't matter if he was just a child. The truth needed to be revealed, and he had a duty to protect. Suddenly, he heard a distant creak coming from the front door. His entire body stiffened. Someone had entered the library. Silence once again filled the space, but his senses were too sharp to believe it was just an illusion. Darius quickly gathered up the papers, put them back in his bag, and kept only the worn notebook in his hands, as if he were just an ordinary student. The sound of footsteps echoed between the shelves, slow, careful, as if the person knew exactly where he was. Darius held his breath, trying to control the trembling in his hands. Fear grew, but along with it, so did the certainty that he needed to make a quick decision. And it was in that moment, surrounded by books and secrets, that he understood there was no turning back. What he carried wasn't just information. It was a sentence that could make him a target at any moment. Darius's heart was pounding so hard, he thought it echoed through the library shelves. Footsteps approached slowly, each creak of the wooden floor a warning that time was running out. The bag lay at his feet, laden with dangerous truths, and he knew he couldn't stay there much longer. He was faced with a choice that would define not just that night, but the entire course of his life. For a moment, he considered running again. It was what any child would do. He would throw the bag into some dark corner, escape through the back door, and try to erase everything he had seen from his mind. It would be the safest option, the one that would return him to the ordinary life he had always known. But as he looked at the notebook he held in his hands, he remembered all the notes he had kept over the years, every detail he observed, every suspicion he recorded, every line he wrote was, in fact, an unconscious rehearsal for this moment. He had prepared himself, unknowingly, to face a secret no one else would dare. Darius wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and closed his eyes for a few seconds, letting his mother's voice echo in his memory. Courage is doing what is right, even when everything in you tells you to give up. Those words took on a different weight now, as if they had been spoken especially for tonight. He took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, there was no longer any room for doubt. He couldn't keep quiet. He couldn't hide. He needed to find someone he could trust, someone who hadn't sold their soul to corruption. The first name that came to mind was Mr. Johnson, the journalist who worked for a small community newspaper. His mother often commented that, although his stories rarely made it into major media outlets, he was a man of integrity who never accepted the truth in exchange for favors. Darius had often seen him in the square, handing out copies of his articles, in the hope that at least a few would care. Perhaps no one else believed him, but now Darius knew that Johnson was his only real chance to give voice to the evidence. The decision weighed like lead, but at the same time it gave him a strange relief. For the first time that night, he felt a clear purpose. He picked up his bag, stood slowly, and walked to the library's side exit. The sound of mysterious footsteps still echoed, but he blended into the darkness, using the silence as his ally. As he crossed the street, the city seemed different. The streetlights, the dark alleys, the lit windows, everything now held a tinge of suspicion. Who could be watching? Who already knew he was carrying this evidence? And most of all, how far were they willing to go to prevent him from revealing the truth? Darius quickened his pace, his bag clutched tightly against his body. He was determined. No matter the risk, no matter the fear, he had to find the journalist. He had to deliver that evidence, no matter the cost. The problem was both simple and daunting: how to get to Johnson without being intercepted first. The night wore on, and every corner seemed to hide invisible eyes, ready to watch Darius's every step. The cold New York wind bit his face, but the boy didn't slow down. The bag clutched to his chest was both a weight and a flame, something that threatened to crush him but also gave him courage. The streets were emptier than usual, and this only heightened his sense of imminent danger. At every distant noise, he turned his head, fearing he might see again the figures of the police officers who had watched him in the square. The walk to the small community newspaper wasn't long, but it felt endless. The building housing the newsroom was modest, almost invisible amid the city's tall buildings. Its windows were rarely lit at night, but Darius bet Mr. Johnson would be there as usual, reviewing stories that almost no one read. He pushed open the wooden door, which creaked as if to announce his arrival, and found the man hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and old newspaper clippings. The journalist looked up, surprised to see a boy so late at night. "What are you doing here, kid?" he asked quietly, as if afraid to disturb the silence that dominated the room. Darius didn't respond immediately. He approached slowly, placed the bag on the table, and with a nervous gesture, unzipped it. The document slid out, scattering like a whirlwind of suffocated truths. Johnson's eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in shock. He picked up one of the folders, flipped through it quickly, and murmured, "My God, do you have any idea what this is?" The boy just nodded, his gaze steady despite his fear. "They're everywhere," he whispered. "I've seen them, police officers, judges, businessmen. No one will believe me, but you can show the world." The journalist was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the weight of the words. His hands trembled as he held the papers, and his breathing quickened as the depth of it sank in. "I spent years trying to prove there was something behind these people," he confessed. "They always laughed at me, called me a conspirator, ridiculed me, and now a boy hands me the key to everything." Darius watched silently, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. Johnson seemed not only surprised but also filled with new energy, as if he saw before him the chance to finally fulfill his life's mission. The journalist turned on his old computer, inserted the flash drive, and waited anxiously. When the files appeared on the screen, his expression changed completely. There were recordings of compromising conversations, audio, recordings of bribes being arranged, videos of secret meetings where powerful figures were mentioned without hesitation. It was irrefutable evidence. "This is going to go off like a bomb," Johnson said breathlessly. "But we need to tread carefully. If these people find out you brought this to me, your life is in danger." Darius already knew this, but hearing it out loud made him even more aware of its gravity. "It doesn't matter," he replied. "They're already after me. What matters is that the truth comes out." The journalist looked at him with admiration, almost moved by the courage he rarely saw, even in adults. "You are braver than many men I've known." Then he took a deep breath and concluded, "Tomorrow, when the sun rises, the whole world will know." But as he spoke, a metallic clang from the door made them both turn at the same time, a slight creak, but enough to freeze the room. There was no doubt someone was outside. Johnson quickly turned off the monitor, gathered up the documents, and shoved the bag back to Darius. "Stay behind me," he ordered firmly. "If they've found us, we don't have much time." The boy obeyed, his heart racing again. The seconds dragged on like hours, and tension filled every inch of the newsroom. And in that instant, before the door was even opened, Darius understood that the real hell was just beginning. Dawn brought a storm unlike any the city had ever seen. Newspaper front pages carried bold headlines: "Scandal explodes, corruption at sea." The heart of power. Television stations interrupted their programming for special reports, each channel competing to reveal the most details. The evidence was clear and indisputable. Photos, recordings, forged contracts, all before the eyes of millions. In the streets, crowds gathered in front of newsstands, shocked by the names exposed. Judges, respected business people, political leaders who spoke of integrity, all were compromised. The feeling of disbelief spread like wildfire, tearing through. A veil the city never wanted to see. Protests began to emerge in different neighborhoods. Makeshift signs were held aloft, and voices echoed demanding justice. The outrage was mixed with an unprecedented hope. Perhaps, finally, the truth would have a place to shine. On social media, every video, every audio, every document circulated rapidly, reaching even the most distant corners. In the corridors of power, despair set in. Denials and justifications struggled to resist, but the avalanche of evidence was impossible to ignore. Arrests began to be made. Patrol cars left luxurious buildings, carrying away previously untouchable figures, handcuffed amid flashes of light and screams from the crowd. It was a spectacle no one had imagined they would witness, a collapse of trust that seemed unshakable. And at the center of this earthquake was a boy. His name was still being kept secret, but many were already talking about an unsung hero, a boy who dared to challenge the city's giants. Journalist Johnson reported on the unexpected arrival of the evidence, avoiding exposing Darius, while the boy watched everything hidden beside his mother. Angela hugged him, proud and frightened by the magnitude of what was happening, aware that her son's courage had changed the city's destiny, but that danger still lurked. Despite the arrests, not everyone had been reached. Some names remained in the shadows, wounded, seeking revenge. The city was in shock, but the enemies remained active. Darius felt this, even as he saw the crowd cheer and heard hopeful comments. A sense of unease accompanied him, reminding him that this story was not yet over. Amid the noise of the headlines and the chaos of the streets, something would emerge to prove that his journey was far from over. The afternoon fell upon the city with a different tone. The air seemed lighter, as if the newly revealed truth had swept away some of the darkness that suffocated everyone. Darius walked through the same square, where it all began. The gentle wind swayed the trees, and the children resumed playing as if nothing had happened. For him, however, every detail of that place now carried symbolic weight. It was there, on that seemingly ordinary wooden bench, that his life had been transformed forever. He sat for a moment, letting his gaze wander the horizon. He wasn't just a boy with an old notebook. He had become, albeit unwittingly, the protagonist of a story that had changed the fate of an entire city. His heart still bore the scars of the fear he'd experienced, but also the warmth of courage born amidst the darkness. Darius hadn't sought glory nor recognition. What he wanted was simple, for the truth to be heard. His mother arrived soon after, walking with firm steps, and sat beside him. Angela took her son's hand, squeezing it tenderly, her eyes brimming with pride. "You were braver than many adults would be, Darius," she said, her voice breaking. He smiled, but silently, as if knowing that words would never be enough to convey everything he had experienced. Yet as the square filled again with the sounds of laughter and movement, something made his heart race. Across the street, standing in the shade of a tree, was the woman with the bag. She wore different clothes now, but her eyes remained the same, intense, deep, watching him silently. There was no anger in her expression, nor relief, only mystery. Darius held her gaze for a few seconds, trying to decipher her intentions. Who was she really? A victim who had decided to expose corruption, a repentant accomplice, or perhaps someone who still carried secrets even greater than those he had already revealed? Uncertainty burned like fire within him. When he blinked, she was gone. She had disappeared into the shadows of the street, like a puzzle that refused to be solved. The boy took a deep breath and looked back at the park bench. He knew, deep down, that his story wasn't over. The courage that had brought him here would be tested again, because the city's secrets were far from exhausted. And it was in this reflective silence that he understood a powerful truth. Even the smallest can carry within them the strength necessary to change the world. If you believe this story deserves to be told to even more people, subscribe to the channel now, turn on notifications, and share this video. Your participation is what keeps the mission of bringing moving stories of courage and truth alive. Don't miss the next chapters, because each new video may reveal even more surprising secrets.